Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, August 8th, 2024, 50 years to the day since the resignation of Richard Nixon from the presidency. It's time for our Intelligence Community Roundtable. It's not quite the end of the week. It's almost the end of the week. It's almost the end of the day. But scheduling has forced us to do this now. Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson join us now. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and the double duty that you always both give the viewers and me on this program. We have a lot to discuss. I'd like to start by talking about the unfortunate events at the home of our dear friend and colleague, Scott Ritter, yesterday. My understanding is that a federal search warrant was served by a team of about 20 FBI agents on Scott Ritter's home. According to what Scott said afterwards, they were polite, they were professional, they didn't do any damage, but they took a lot of material from him, including his archives, including his work as the UN chief weapons inspector, including all of his electronic devices, and including the draft he had written of an as yet, of course, unpublished book, since they took the draft of it. The way this works is someone, usually an FBI agent, on the basis of some information, submits an affidavit prepared by the U.S. attorney to a federal judge or a federal magistrate judge, and the magistrate judge signs the search warrant, and then the FBI executes it. So that's all we seem to know now. I'm sure you both have thoughts on this. Ray, I'll start with you.
Well, I just think it's absurd. They are accusing Scott, apparently, of having violated the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They're saying that he's working for the Russian government, when Scott admits quite freely that when RT pays him or Sputnik pays him, just like anyone else, that's his living. He's a journalist. And the thought that he skewers his views to dovetail with Russian policy is absurd. Now, Scott has been saying for years now that Ukraine is going to win this war. Putin has been saying for years now that sorry, not Ukraine, but Russia's going to win this war. So Putin's been saying the same thing. So who's in whose pocket? Is Putin in Scott Ritter's pocket, or Scott Ritter? It happens to be true, and it's nearing completion. The same thing with Israel, and people don't realize this. Scott said early on, the Israeli army is really kind of overrated. It's not going to beat Hamas. Whoa, what heresy! Everyone thought that the Israeli army would make short work of Hamas. No, Scott knew better, okay? So they have a lot of grievances for a guy who tells the truth and deflates some of the legends that they put out for public consumption.
Larry, before you start, here's the statute. Now, it's long, so I'm going to summarize it. An agent of a foreign principal. This is FARA. This is the Foreign Agent Registration Act. An agent of a foreign principal is any person who acts as an agent, representative, employee, or servant, or otherwise acts at the order, request, or under the direction or control of a foreign principal. Foreign principal is basically a foreign government. And does any of the following: engages within the United States in political activities intended to influence the U.S. government in favor of the foreign principal, acts within the United States as a public relations publicity agent for the foreign principal, solicits, collects, disperses, or dispenses money in behalf of the foreign principal, represents the foreign principal before the federal government. I don't know how they could possibly claim that Ritter does any of that, but I'll let you weigh in, Larry. It's an earful that I just articulated, so I can repeat it if you want.
Well, it's only true if Scott has gone to work for AIPAC. So he's now for the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And yeah, he's guilty of not being a foreign registered agent. Well, we all know that's nonsense. The double standard here is remarkable. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising, but it is so staggering in its dimensions. When you look at what Hunter Biden actually did, and it's documented on the Hunter Biden laptop, and soliciting money, getting paid positions, all to influence his father, who was the vice president, and using the big guy as the ticket to get paid from overseas. If you see FBI agents going to Hunter's house to grab that material, oh, no, 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 no. And the fact that they refused to follow procedure, where normally someone, if they really thought there was a legitimate case, they would have called Scott up and said, hey, you need to register as a foreign agent. If you don't, then you're going to be in violation. That's what the government's supposed to do. Well, they didn't do that because that's not what this is about. This is about trying to shut Scott up. And anybody that, I've known Scott for about 20 years. Anybody who thinks that some foreign government can, use Scott as some marionette, some puppet, where they tell him what to talk, when to talk, and what to say, they don't know Scott. He's not known for having quiet opinions.
Right. Ray McGovern, how courageous is Scott?
I don't know of anyone who has more guts than Scott. A little wrinkle on what Larry just said. When RT was legal in this country, I used to appear regularly on RT. Of course, I never got paid for anything like that. But at one point, it occurred to me that there's something distinctive about RT, and that was this. Fox News, ABC, NBC, CBS, they all wanted to do a pre-interview interview. They wanted to know what I want to say, what I was going to say. And I was often shut down when they had somebody else. Okay. I asked on air, I said, now, it was Max Blumenthal's wife. I said, now, did you ask me for a pre-interview interview? And she said, well, of course not. I said, well, be advised, you guys are the only people that don't ask me for that. That's why I never give a pre-interview interview. That's why I'm delighted to be on RT. Of course, you can't see RT now on the way you used to be able to see it. You can see it on the web, and it's a very lucrative source. You have to read between the lines, but you should be an adult to be able to do that. I think I'm an adult by now.
Larry, do you think that this will have a chilling effect on others who have, not the three of us and not the people on this program, but others who have been critical of the United States government policy with respect to Russia and with respect to Israel?
Yeah, it will. I think it will in some cases, but it also is going to have, I think, the effect of drawing attention to Scott and to his message in a way that otherwise would not have happened. And all of that's going to coincide with what will be, a across the board collapse of U.S. foreign policy in both Ukraine and the Middle East. So that'll make it very, very difficult to maintain the narrative that the administration's been pushing. So it's where these kinds of things backfire. I hope Scott is setting up a Give, Send, Go page where people can contribute so he can get a proper legal defense and get paid for what they're doing. Because this is, in this search warrant, they took documents that were not covered in the search warrant. Just outrageous.
Here's Scott, cut number 16.
The State Department, using government appropriated monies for this purpose, created a Center for Countering Disinformation as an adjunct of the Ukrainian president's office. They did this in 2022. One of the first things that this Center for Countering Disinformation did, under the guidance and direction of the State Department of the United States, was to issue a blacklist of people that they called information terrorists. And on that blacklist were a large number of Americans, including myself. And this list, this center since that time, and here's the important thing about being called an information terrorist. That's a specific term being used by the Ukrainians, backed by the United States government. They said that an information terrorist must be hunted down and brought to justice the same way any terrorist would. And so I've been accused of saying things that make the Ukrainian government unhappy. They now say that I must be hunted down and arrested, detained, killed as would any other terrorist in the world, and other Americans as well. They have made me, this center, again, with the U.S. State Department's support, has put out a list that, a weekly list where they say I'm the number one threat to truth.
This was Scott on this show the day after the State Department had seized his passport at JFK Airport. Well, look, Scott knows what to do. He knows he needs competent counsel. He doesn't need advice from me. The defense lawyers that the feds fear the most are former federal prosecutors who have retained their national security clearances. It's a small cadre of them. They're not cheap, but they're out there. They're all over the East Coast. And Scott knows that I have advised him to seek the services of one of those people. Transitioning over, is there any news, Larry, on the assassination attempt? The most recent news that I have seen is a video of Pennsylvania State Police complaining to Secret Service that the rooftop from which crooks would shoot, this complaint was the day before, needed to be covered.
Yeah. In addition to, there's a video show from the officer's body cam. It's not really very informative. The fellow who climbed up on the roof and was confronted with crooks pointing a gun, pointing a rifle at him, and then he rapidly climbs down, runs away. The level of incompetence that was displayed by the Secret Service that day, particularly in terms of Secret Service management and leadership. The one young lady that we saw on the video who was fumbling, called her Fumbleina, fumbling to get her firearm back in the holster. She apparently was the agent in charge and had a reputation for not only being inexperienced, but incompetent. And she lived up to her reputation that day. We can say that with confidence. So this is one of those situations, as we've described before, was this a deliberate attempt to create a fear in order to kill Trump? And were there some broader purposes in mind? I find it interesting that they tried out immediately that this was Iran trying to kill Trump. Imagine if Trump had actually died. Would they have used that as a justification to try to whip up a war against Iran? Of course, I heard that suggestion from someone, and I said, you got to wonder that at that point, all the Trump haters might be, sending, congratulatory notes to the Iranians, given how depraved they are.
Ray, wouldn't there be, in the hands of Intel, all the conversations that these cops had with each other? Wouldn't there be a way to document this, or will Intel just never admit that it has this stuff?
Well, my source for all this is Bill Binney, who knows chapter and verse about what's available to NSA. There is some question as to whether if the local cops were using a mobile device, or they were using something that was not available to the Secret Service, which is what some people are claiming. Well, why the hell was that the case? Why were they in two separate command centers? Judge, there's too many mistakes. There's too many coincidences. I asked my friend Bill Binney, Bill, you deal with probabilities as a mathematician par excellence. Tell me about how you come. This is what he said. Listen to Ray. He says, look, each of those Secret Services mistakes, look at them individually. What's the probability of each one happening? Say 10%. Okay, now consider the probability of the 5 most consequential mistakes happening at the same event, randomly. Okay, randomly. For each mistake, the random chance is 1 in 10. So that makes the aggregate for 5 mistakes 1 chance in 100,000. It's close to a 0% probability rate. So this sure doesn't look random. the math itself points to something else. Well, yeah, I mean, probabilities, they throw light on things, and I just see too many coincidences here, too many overlooked things. And I think that the real problem is that the investigation will be dominated by the FBI, which I have to say, and it's not just based on what they did to Scott yesterday. I don't trust the FBI to investigate possibly itself.
Switching gears, Larry, what do you make of the invasion by Ukrainian military into Kursk, Russia? My understanding is that the troops who did this were the best Ukraine has, whereas those back west fighting the Russian onslaught are the worst Ukraine has. What would be gained other than PR boasting by attacking civilian sites in this city in eastern Russia?
Well, let's correct your statement in one regard. It's past tense. They were the best because now they're dead. The vast majority have been killed. You're right. It is a PR stunt. It was seen as either an attempt to divert attention from the losses in the Donbass and to grab some portion of, quote, Russian territory that the Russians in the Ukrainian view would be so terrified and so fearful that they would ultimately say, oh, let's get to the negotiating table and please give us our territory back. And these guys haven't been, they're not paying attention. And this is just like the failed offensive of 2023 that started in June of 2023, where once again, these Ukrainian forces charged forward without any kind of air cover. Air is not a universal solution to every problem, but it is a critical component of combined arms activity like this. So the Russians have plenty of reinforcements. They got plenty of personnel, and they have air assets, unlike the Ukrainians. They've got drones, they've got artillery, but more importantly, they've got a lot more manpower. They killed over 600 soldiers in just that area alone yesterday and today, approaching 700. And then when you total up the ones being killed farther south, you're looking at casualties that are well into the 2,000s, almost 3,000, which is much higher loss than sustained heretofore.
That's 2,000 to 3,000 a day. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ray, would CIA have known of this planned invasion of Kursk before it happened?
Of course it would, and so would the Department of Defense. The real unexplained absurdity here is how the U.S. would encourage, or elements of the U.S. government would encourage Budanov, who is the commander of these special forces, to do this thing. What are they going to do when they get into Russia? I mean, hello, how could they possibly keep control of just a couple of square miles of territory? It's ridiculous. It makes no sense at all. And to the degree that the U.S. is in on this, and if they don't know what's happening in Ukraine, I mean, that's crazy. Of course they know. They're in the units, they're in the intelligence services and so forth. So are they encouraging Budanov? Well, I can only assume that, yes, elements of the Pentagon, of the CIA, of the White House are encouraging the Ukrainians to do these crazy things, which will do nothing other than to hasten their loss. Now, having said that, I want to say that I'm not getting paid for saying this kind of thing by Putin or by Archie or by Sputnik or anybody else. This is my own view. If Putin agrees with it, well, that's his problem. He could be in McGovern's pocket.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor McGovern. Larry, recently, I understand, and I'll let you explain this, please, the Houthis killed a significant number of IDF and American contractors. What can you tell us about this?
Well, again, this is one of those reports out there. I've not seen the video, not seen it confirmed, but I did get it from a reliable source that an estimated 70 both Israeli and Blackwater squad were going to infiltrate about sabotage activities on the ground, try to locate these mobile launch systems and destroy them. And the Russians reportedly had intelligence that they passed to the Houthis about the arrival of this 70-man team. And the Houthis reportedly ambushed them and killed them all.
And
So
the
we'll
70-man team consisted of IDF soldiers and American mercenaries. As you said,
Correct.
Blackwater, that's
Correct.
an American company, right?
Correct. It was Blackwater, originally set up by Eric Vance. It's not. It's changed its name. I forget. Maybe it's XI, something like that. But if true, this shows you part of the frustration that the West had in trying to control those damn Houthis. We sent our aircraft carrier, and they were supposed to quake in their shoes and up, and they didn't. And they've continued to shut down the Red Sea. Our aircraft carrier is limped away. May or may not be replaced by another one. So, the problem of locating these mobile launch systems has been very difficult. And that's why the Houthis are actually, making the United States look pretty foolish.
Ray, what advice would Mossad give to their commanders, and would CIA give back to Langley about the advisability of an IDF attack on Hezbollah?
Well, I think the IDF has its own intelligence components. Mossad, of course, would support them. But it's very clear that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are very chary about going against Hezbollah, for very good reason. They lost last time, right? So I think they recognize Netanyahu's game as to get involved with Hezbollah and then need U.S. help, and appeal to the Biden regime in the last 5+ months of its existence to come to its aid and get the U.S. involved militarily. That's the name of the game. Very clear to me. Whether the U.S. would be able to avoid getting involved militarily in an election year is another question. Judge, what bothers me most is what people are calling the Samson option. The Israelis are losing in Gaza. They're going to lose if they go against Hezbollah. Whether or not we help them, they're going to lose this fray. Iran and Turkey, they're going to come in, and Israel's going to lose. Now, what are the chances you would give Netanyahu not to resort to the use of nuclear weapons? I think he probably would. So that's what we're playing with here. That's why the U.S. input here is very, very important, as is the Russian input on Iran. Iran, please, say the Russians, please don't do anything to make the U.S. come in, to make the U.S. unable to avoid coming in, at least for the next 5.5 months. Please. So I think that's what's going on now. Maybe that accounts for some of the delay in the celebrated or eagerly anticipated Iranian response to the assassinations.
Yeah, let me add one thing in there to that. The level of cooperation between Iran and Russia on the military front has dramatically accelerated over the last 2 years. Iranian drone production did play a critical role for the Russians in their use of drones to counter the Ukrainian offensive, particularly last year. And part of that is attributable to the fact that the Iranians downed and recovered a CIA drone about 9 years ago, but it was one of the most sophisticated drones the CIA had, and Iran proceeded to clone it. So now what's going on is the Russians are this is my firm belief, the Russians are delivering at a minimum S-400, possibly S-500 anti-ballistic missile defense systems.
Let me just stop you. What do those numbers mean, S-400 and S-500? Where are they on the level of sophistication?
It's just S-500 is the most sophisticated. S-400 is like the latest, greatest. But S-500 is even more recent vintage. The Ukrainians had the S-300, which goes back to, I believe, the 1970s, 1980s. But the S-400 is basically has come out since George W. Bush walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2000 or 2002. So the Russians have the Russians have a system that can take out ballistic missiles. So they're not only deploying those, they're deploying Russian crews to service those weapon systems. And I believe that word has been passed both to Washington and Tel Aviv. If you strike these systems, and if our soldiers are attacked, that's going to be viewed as an attack on Russia. One of the other things is probably giving the Israelis pause about their preemptive strike that they keep talking about, but they're not doing. And I think Russia actually may be playing a more important role behind the scenes right now in trying to keep this from escalating to a hot war, because they understand if Iran strikes Israel, Israel will try to retaliate, and they'll retaliate with nukes. And once they retaliate with nukes, the entire oil production out of the Persian Gulf is done. The world is going to be looking down the face of a nuclear war. And I think Russia prefers to try to avoid that if they can.
Does does Iran, Larry, have nuclear weapons?
They might. I mean, they've got the systems to deliver it. They've got the facilities to produce it, but up to this point, we've not had any evidence that they have produced it. And they have the technical knowledge to build the warhead to go on the weapons. So, could they have developed it? We've in the past, the intelligence community's judged that no, because for religious reasons, they wanted to steer clear of that. But in light of the different attacks that they've undertaken, because let's not kid ourselves. The United States has had long-standing support going back 40 years to a variety of groups that have carried out what we would label as terrorist attacks inside Iran, both from the Baluchis in southeast Iran, the Kurds, and then this group, the Mujahideen al-Haq, MEK. So, Iran may have just reached a point of saying, okay, we got to defend ourselves.
Judge, it's very important to emphasize that there's no evidence that they've reached that point. There is some speculation and a couple of statements by senior Iranian officials. Oh, maybe you ought to reassess where we are on building a nuclear weapon, as distinct from highly enriched uranium. Okay, so the danger here is to say, well, it makes really good sense for the Iranians to reassess this and maybe go ahead and do a nuclear weapon. But we have, with the intelligence community, have more to rely on than fatwas or spiritual statements against this. We will know almost as soon as they try to do a nuclear weapon to fill with highly enriched uranium. So let's not give any fodder to the John Boltons and others of this world who say, well, now they're going to get a nuclear weapon. So far, so good. As of March, the intelligence community was sticking to its unanimous decision expressed with high confidence back in November of 2007 that they were not working on a nuclear weapon and that there was no indication that they planned to.
Let me ask each of you, starting with Larry, what is your best prediction, understanding of what will happen with Israel, Iran, Hezbollah? Is Netanyahu crazy enough to attack Hezbollah directly?
Yes. Well, and let's understand, they're already attacking. Israel is already attacking Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon and up into Beirut. And Hezbollah is attacking Israel's, firing off rockets, missiles, and even anti-tank guided missiles at Israeli positions. They forced out 100,000 Israelis from kibbutzim in the north. And the Houthis are firing. So it's not like we're going from a position of everything's tranquil, nobody's doing anything. What we're talking about is, are we going to see the kind of escalation that Netanyahu will order the IDF into southern Lebanon? Maybe. But what we've had as well is pushback from the Israeli military leadership. And they may reach a conclusion that what Netanyahu's asking them to do is a suicide mission, and will then refuse orders. And then, because we've already had groups of Israelis attacking other Israelis, particularly over the rape of Palestinian prisoners, where you had some of the army's security force go in to arrest those guards that were guilty of sodomizing Palestinian male prisoners. And then on top of that, you see the attacks that have taken place by the settlers going in trying to free these people. So let's get ourselves that they're all, in the same boat in the same direction.
Ray, what's your feeling about the next phase of Netanyahu's bellicosity?
Judge, it all depends on his reading, that is Netanyahu's reading of the support he can expect from the United States. Now, absent a declaration, a formal one, that the U.S. will not support Israel if it gets into war with Hezbollah, absent that, Netanyahu has such a deep stake in what's going on that he's going to try to do that. Now, would the Israeli military refuse orders? I don't know. They certainly have opposed this idea, but my guess is that they would go ahead and would be involved in a major conflict. And maybe Netanyahu is right. Maybe he's as sly as a fox and says, well, here the U.S. will have to come in because Blinken and Sullivan are running this thing. They're both Zionists and they don't want to lose the election. They don't want to lose the support of AIPAC and the major donors. So, it's very volatile. If Netanyahu has his way, I think there will be a greater conflagration. Whether Iran reacts in a measured way, as I think not only the U.S., but the Russians have been advising Iran to do, if they pick their targets really carefully and lessen the chances that this will blow up into a big, wider regional war, that would be another case that would argue for tamping down a widening of the war. But you can't depend on that either, because they are going to react, and they're going to react strongly, and then Netanyahu will be in a position of seeing if he's going to be able to persuade the U.S. to come in. He said that the Americans have supported us 80%. He said that 25 years ago, 80%. And then he added, that's absurd. Well, and it may not be 80% anymore, but it's 80% of the donor class. And that's what counts. And that's what Netanyahu counts here before the election. That's my reading.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you yet again for your double duty this week. I look forward to seeing you on at your usual times on Monday, and next week back to Friday afternoon. We're pretending this is Friday. Thank you very much. All the best to both of you, my friends.
Thanks, Judge.
Mm-hmm.
Coming up at 5:00 Eastern today, worth waiting for, Colonel Douglas McGregor, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.